anda sadece Holocaust değil, Ruanda'yı da içine dahil eden bir şey de genişletmeyi düşünüyorum. Ama işte bilmiyorum, çok motivasyonum da yok.
Good evening, everyone. Good to see everyone here. Welcome to the Armenian Studies Program lecture series. I'm Professor Barlo Dermagradichian. I'd like to welcome you to Fresno State. And we'll just talk to you a little bit about some of our upcoming events over the next few weeks that we're going to be having. Next Friday night, which is October the 24th, it'll come up in just a moment. We're going to have our annual short film showing. These are 6 short films which are part of a nationwide competition, actually international competition, sponsored by the AGBU. And we screen those films here at Fresno State. They're just really interesting films. They're short films from 5 minutes to 15 minutes long. So that will be next Friday at the Leon S. Peters Educational Center, which is in our other building. If you want to follow our events, you go on our Facebook or Instagram and you can see all of our upcoming events. And then on Friday, November the 7th, 2 weeks after that, our own Dr. David Zakarian is going to be giving a very interesting lecture. Actually, I can move it up to it. It's called Medieval Book Curses, How Armenians Guarded Their Manuscripts. And Dr. Zakarian will talk about the Armenian colophons, the memorial notes at the end of Armenian manuscripts, in which the scribes inscribed curses. And I'll let you come to the lecture to hear why they would do such a thing. So that's going to be next, that's November the 7th, that's Friday, November the 7th. That will be in our other building. We're kind of moving around in venues. And then on Friday, November the 14th, we're going to have Kevork Aflazian, who just graduated from Fresno State with his master's degree. And the topic of his master's degree is about the question of what decision-making took place for Armenians in the repatriation of 1946 and 1948. And he focused on the Armenians living in Musada in Lebanon, in Musada, Anjar, which is now in Lebanon, and about their decision-making. How did they decide to go to Armenia or not to go to Armenia? So he'll be speaking about that. He'll be in this hall at 7 o'clock on Friday, November the 14th. So we have lots of events left in our Armenian lecture series, and so we want to welcome you and say to you, if you'd like to, come out and be part of that. So tonight we're going to be beginning an international conference called A New History Writing on Late-Ottoman-Turkish History, the Impact of Memoirs. And this conference is actually one of a series of conferences which have explored understudied areas of Armenian and Ottoman relations. And some of the conferences we have been on microhistories in Armenian studies. A few years ago we did a conference on the state of the art of the early Turkish Republic. One on the Committee of Union and Progress founders, and also our first conference was on Armenians and Kurds in the late Ottoman Empire. And our intent by bringing together the scholars that we have is that they present to the community and to each other, but then we also ask that they prepare papers, articles that will be book chapters in a publication which will put this into circulation so that scholars all over the world can read that. So this has been an outcome of discussions over the past few years with my colleague, Dr. Ümit Kurt, and he'll be introduced in just a moment. But Dr. Kurt and I have, over the years, had lots of discussions about the topics that we're presenting. And we go back and forth, and usually he's the one that presents something. And I say, well, that sounds good, but let's do this. And then he'll come back to it. And over the course of several months, we come up with these topics and then are able to bring in all of these scholars with us today. So this is made possible through the support of many of our trust funds in the Armenian Studies program. If you have your programs with you, if you look on the last page, there are 4 foundations which are supporting our conferences. The Thomas A. Kuyumjin Family Foundation, the Leon S. Peters Foundation, the Ralph Shapazian Memorial Fund, and the Florence Elaine Hamperson Memorial Fund. And these were set up by community members to support our Armenian Studies program activities, including lectures, conferences, and such. So all of that is thanks to our community, and we want to thank them. I'd also like to introduce and thank our colleagues in the Armenian Studies program. So Dr. David Zakarian is the Haig and Isabel Berberian Professor of Armenian Studies. He is starting his second year at Fresno State teaching. Tomorrow he will be the moderator for our third panel, so you'll get to hear from him a little bit more. Also have Dr. Hagop Ohanessian. Dr. Hagop, raise your hand at least so that everyone can see you. Dr. Ohanessian teaches in the Armenian Studies program. I believe it's his 11th year, is that right? 11th year teaching in the program, and he teaches our Introduction to Armenian Studies course, and he also teaches an upper division course in Armenian culture in translation, which is really about Armenian literature. So this is our faculty at Fresno State. We're lucky to have 3 faculty in Armenian Studies, and so we're a very rich program in that sense because it's so diverse. I also want to thank my office assistant, Alan Avakhanyan, who's up here, who is helping with the food layout and all of that, so I want to thank you for your help tonight. So tonight, the format for our conference is going to be, we're going to have an opening keynote speech by Dr. Taner Akçam, who I'll introduce in just a moment, followed by two of our presenters who will give brief presentations. When I say brief, 20 to 25 minutes. That'll be panel number 1. That will conclude, and then tomorrow we're going to have 2 more panels at the Smith Camp Alumni House. The address is on the program. It's not far from here. Everything is free. The parking is free. Come in the morning. We have some bagels and coffee from Uncle Harry's bagelry in Fresno. Turns out that Uncle Harry's is Armenian, and actually the owners are the grandchildren of one of our donors who established the Haig and Isabel Berberian Chair in Armenian Studies. So there's always an Armenian connection in Fresno as we take a look at it. So tonight I have the pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker, Dr. Taner Akçam. He's the inaugural director of the Armenian Genocide Research Program of the Promise Armenian Institute at UCLA. Previously, he was the Kalustian and Lugar Chair in Modern Armenian History and Genocide in the Strassler Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Clark University in Massachusetts. He received his doctorate from the University of Hanover with a dissertation entitled Turkish Nationalism and the Armenian Genocide on the Background of the Military Tribunals in Istanbul between 1919 and 1922. He later moved to the United States and served as visiting scholar at the University of Michigan and also a visiting associate professor of history at the University of Minnesota. He is a prolific author and scholar, and among the multiple books that he has written, the most recent, Killing Orders, Talat Pasha's Telegrams and the Armenian Genocide, From Empire to Republic, Turkish Nationalism and the Armenian Genocide, the book called A Shameful Act, The Young Turks' Crime Against Humanity, the Armenian Genocide, and also with Dr. Kurt, The Spirit of the Laws, The Plunder of Wealth in the Armenian Genocide. He's doing extraordinary work at UCLA in the Genocide Project. Those of you that were here a few weeks ago, he spoke with Professor Michael Basler regarding the looting of Armenian art and how there's a project now to try to recover that Armenian genocide looted art. And as Professor Basler gave us the example of what Jewish people are doing with the Nazi looted art, it gave us a model for Armenians now to also pursue that art which was looted during the Armenian genocide. He's also the founder of the Krikor-Gagarin Online Archive, which is an online archive of one of the most important sources for Armenian history in the world. So it's my pleasure to welcome once again to Fresno State, Dr. Taner Akçam. Dr. Akçam.
Thank you, good evening. And where are you going, Ümit? Thank you so much. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you so much for inviting me. I wanted to thank you because Ümit called me and invited me for this evening. And thank you, Barbara, for this invitation. And it is a really great pleasure for me to introduce my paper, a new, I think, an exciting topic. I assume some of Turkish friends even haven't heard some of the issues that I'm going to talk this evening. So in this talk, my central argument is that we need first the clock. This is important, yeah. So we need a new approaches to the historiography of the late Ottoman and early Republican period. the dominant fragmented narratives that isolate the histories of Armenians, Kurds, Assyrians, and Turks must fundamentally change. What we need instead, a more holistic and what I call integrated history. You will hear this term this evening a lot. Integrated history, one that not only captures their intertwined destinies, but also contributes to the possibility of coexistence and regional peace. The approach I propose, therefore, aims not only to understand the past, but also to imagine a different future. I will develop my argument for integrated history through a single historical event, the Sheikh Said Rebellion 1925, and three key testimonies that challenge existing historiography. The first is Safar Safar's biographical account of Malak Barşom, an Assyrian lawyer from Midyat who was executed for participating in the rebellion. The memoir, The Origin of Heroes, a story of struggle, patriotism, and sacrifice, reveals a broad and previously neglected Assyrian participation in the uprising. The second source is not a memoir at all, in a strict sense, but information posted on Facebook by my friend Cemşikaya from Dersim, based on oral history testimonies that he compiled from Koçuşağı tribe to which he belongs. According to these internal accounts, there had been significant Alevite Kurdish participation in the rebellion, a fact long denied by dominant historiography, which has portrayed Alevite Kurds as having sided with government during Sheikh Said uprising. The third is Kevork Halatyan's memoir, Tebigaksagan, Towards the Gallows. Written under the pseudonym Taparagan, it provides crucial details about Armenian participation in the uprising, details completely absent from existing accounts. And I'm thankful to Hofsep Hayreni, my dear friend from Brussels, who made an extensive summary and discussed with me the content of this book. I cannot read and talk Armenian, but it was really very important. Crucial book that has to be, must translated actually into English and Turkish languages. Before turning to what these sources reveal, it is worth asking an equally important question. How did we come to know what we know about Sheikh Said rebellion in the first place? Were there not testimonies by those who participated? Nuri Dersimi, Kadri Cemal Pasha, Ekrem Cemilzade, Juarhın, and the others. Why then do their memories remain silent about these aspects? Because we are talking this evening about the memoirs and their impact on historiographies. A brief survey of the existing literature on Sheikh Said movement of 1925 shows that historiography has revolved mainly around three fundamental questions. If you go through the entire publication, which I did in Turkish, English languages, there are three central questions everyone tries to give an answer. The first concern whether the movement was a religious Sharia-based or a nationalist movement. The second asks whether it represented a feudal revolt against the progressive modernist Turkish Republic. The third explores the so-called foreign hand, particularly whether Britain, because of Mosul question, instigated or supported the rebellion. Over time, distinct interpretive camps have emerged around these three questions. including scholars, political actors, and public commentators. Proponents of the official Turkish thesis maintain that the rebellion led by Naqshbandi, this is a Sunni religious sect, Naqshbandi Sheikh Said, was a reactionary attempt to establish a Sharia order in Turkey, in Kurdistan. Even when they acknowledge a separatist Kurdish element, they insist that the defining character was religious. According to this view, the movement was a feudal reaction against the modern and progressive Kemalist regime. Socialist movements of the time, including the Komintern and the Turkish branch, the Communist Party of Turkey, adopted similar interpretation. The Komintern described the uprising as an attempt by Turkish reaction in alliance with Kurdish reaction in alliance with British imperialism to restore the old regime, end quote. In this view, the Kemalist movement represent, quote, a national liberation struggle striving for democracy and the liberation of Turkey from feudal remnants and clerical influence, end quote. The Turkish Communist Party newspaper, Orak Çekiç, followed the line and published headlines during the event uprising such as Sheikh Said leads the Sharia reactionaries, or down with Sharia reaction and feudalism, together with its fanatic sheikhs, caliphs, and sultans, end quote. Islamic circles, by contrast, emphasize Sheikh Said's religious identity and reject any nationalist dimension, arguing that he never sought to establish a Kurdish state. The most frequently cited evidence is Sheikh Said's own interrogation, in which he declared that his goal was to implement the provisions of Sharia and to invite part of the Ummah of Muhammad, the people of Muhammad, to Sharia, while calling a Kurdish government impossible in his testimony in the court. Sheikh Sharif, his regional commander in Elazığ area, used a similar language in the court. Our sole aim is Sharia, he said. Yet, in works written mainly by Kurdish researchers, it is argued that Sheikh Said's religious role was not decisive for the character of the movement, that it was in a sense a national liberation uprising. These authors provide rich evidence, such as the movement's link to an organization which is called Azadi, founded maybe 1920, maybe or 22, nobody knows the exact date, of which Sheikh Said himself was a member, and Azadi symbolized the Kurdish national aspiration actually. Another key piece evidence comes from the indictment of judgment of the Eastern Independent Tribunal, which was established in 1925 to try the Kurds who participated in the uprising. And this argument that it's come in these prosecutors' verdicts and indictments stated plainly that the movement, quote, had no other aim than to establish a Kurdish government. And that, quote, the uprising took place with the aim of establishing an independent Kurdistan. We should also add to this picture, this is the debate on Sheikh Said rebellion in Turkey. This is the literature, this is what they discuss. But I should add to this picture the widely accepted thesis that Alevi Kurds did not participate in the Sheikh Said uprising. This argument, which attributes decisive importance to religious division among Kurds, Sunnis, and Alevites, was extended to interpret all Kurdish uprisings of the 1920s and 1930s, retrospectively asserting that Alevis and Sunni Kurds did not support each other's revolt against the state. One of the first to advance this idea was Nuri Dersimi, a prominent Kurdish nationalist of the early Republic era. Now, here is the interesting part. The memoirs I have discussed clearly and will discuss with you clearly show that the knowledge produced by dominant historiography is not correct. It's incomplete. The problem is not that these narratives are entirely false, but that they represent only a partial truth while concealing an essential dimension of the past, namely the participation of Christians, Assyrians and Armenians, and Alevite Kurds, and thereby contributing to its erasure. Had these memoirs that I'm talking now this evening, had these memoirs not been recorded, this vital layer of historical reality would have been condemned to oblivion. Why? Why then were these perspectives excluded from the dominant narrative? Why were they forgotten or made to be forgotten? Let us now turn to what the prevailing historiography has rendered invisible. Malak Barşom is a lawyer and one of the leading members of Assyrian Safar family from Midyat. On February 27, 1927, he was sentenced to death by the Eastern Independence Tribunal, Şark İstiklal Mahkemesi, established specifically for Sheikh Said uprising, for participating in Sheikh Said rebellion, and was executed at the same day, February 27, 1927. 7 other Assyrians were also executed on similar charges, and the number of Assyrians who were hanged during that period maybe exceeds 20. We will discuss maybe later. According to the court records also, now I was able to look some of the court records, and we know that Malak Barşom participated in a Kurdish uprising, Ali Batı uprising, in 1919, and he helped Armenians to escape from Turkey in the early 1920s, and for which he was then tried for treason in 1923, and then he later joined the Sheikh Said rebellion and was hanged. According to his biographer, Safar, the cousin, in February 1925, 2 Agas named Abdo and Halilo came to visit Barşom, stating that Sheikh Said was planning an uprising and asked Malak Barşom to join the rebellion. Barşom thanked Sheikh Said for the confidence he shown in him, in Malak, and said that quote, would be happy to support his sacred movement, then added, even if I were to give him my belief and support, but there are some obstacles, end quote. What Malak Barşom meant was that Kurdish tribes had played an important role in the destruction of Assyrian communities in 1915. Later, Safar's, the author's father, Abdelaziz, who was the cousin of Malak Barşom, joined the meeting. Abdelaziz said the Kurds were responsible for Seyfo, Assyrian genocide, that they could not forget yesterday's mass killings and therefore could not be trusted. He said that, no, we are not joining into your rebellion. Barşom, however, argued that the Kurds were not primarily responsible for the massacres. Ultimate responsibility lay with Ottoman officials who had ordered them. He believed the only path for Assyrians to escape their current state of subjugation and become equal citizens was the struggle for freedom together with the Kurds. He said, if we want equality, we can get it only with Kurds, we cannot get these from the Turks. According to the information provided by Safar, Malak Barşom met also with Sheikh Said and reached an agreement regarding the uprising. As a result, Barşom joined Sheikh Said rebellion with around 1,000 Assyrians. The number might be a little bit high. When the uprising was crushed, Malak fled to Syria, where he continued his political activities, but he was arrested by the French mandate authorities and extradited to Turkey. And at his hearing on February 27, 1927, he was sentenced to death for direct participation in the rebellion and executed the same day. Other Assyrians were also executed with Barşom in connection with these uprisings. The graves, this is also to my surprise, I didn't know, I learned from my Assyrian friends, the graves of these individuals are in the garden of Assyrian church today in Elazığ, and the location of Barşom's grave is unknown. Assyrians were afraid of putting his grave in the church garden. In the studies carried out on Sheikh Said, there is no single mention of Malak Barşom, of roughly 1,000 Assyrian who joined the uprising, or of the Assyrian who were executed. However, in a report that I discovered in the Dashnak archive, IRF archive in Boston, a report sent to Dashnak Central Bureau March 25, 1925, it was noted that, quote, according to reliable information, the Assyrian regiments are also joined the uprising. Indeed, beyond those arrested and executed after the rebellion, we learn from Assyrian sources, only in Assyrian language, that between 270 and 357 Assyrians were detained and held for months in church. In addition, a large group of about 1,000 people fled to Syria and Iraq, and some of whom perished on the roads due to the severe weather and especially the cold. The Assyrian churches and monasteries were also targets of attacks by Turkish security forces on the ground that Kurdish insurgents had taken refugees in these buildings. Several churches and monasteries were destroyed by Turkish soldiers. Another group that participated in the Armenian, were the Armenians in Sheikh Said rebellion. But it is never mentioned in sources. Collective participation was, of course, out of question in the aftermath of the genocide they had experienced. Instead, involvement took place on an individual basis. Yet, even so, the number was quite significant. According to the records of the Eastern Independence Tribunals that I checked, 9 Armenians were tried in connection with the uprising, 3 were acquitted, 3 received various prison sentences, one of Halatjan that I'm going to talk about him, and 3 were executed. One of those executed was Emin, a converted young Armenian boy. He was under 18 age, and the court increased his age by random decision, and they hanged him. This young boy, around 16, 17 years old. A large number of Armenians were also executed without trial. Halatjan, one of the defendants sentenced to 15-year imprisonment, recalled in his memoirs asking of an official whether Armenians had been executed for taking part in the rebellion. And the reply was striking, and I put it on the slide for you. It is from a Turkish official. He says, how could anything happen without Armenians? Armenians are the yeast. You have to mix them into the milk for the yogurt to set. Among those first executed by firing squad, 13 were Armenians from Silvan region, he said. And many were killed arbitrarily, without any trial. We also have official documents in our hands confirming that Armenians were executed without ever being brought before a court. One reason it is difficult to determine the exact scope of Armenian participation in the uprising is that many Armenians joined the fighting under Kurdish identity. Akçam recounts a striking example. A wounded Kurdish fighter dying in his arms revealed his true identity. Quote, I'm an Armenian, hidden under a Kurdish name. My real name is Kegam Odabashyan. I fought as a Kurd. My comrades were also Armenians. I was wounded as a Kurd, and now I die in the arms of an Armenian. End quote. Akçam also learned from a Kurdish tribal chief whose name he does not disclose that one of the Sheikh Said's leading key commander had in fact been an Armenian. Known by the name Dursun Ferhat, this man was highly educated and was responsible for preparing the battle plans and providing strategic directions for the commanders. According to Akçam's source, Ferhat was killed in the fighting, and his dad played a significant role in the eventual defeat of the movement. In fact, Armenian-Kurdish relations in the aftermath of Armenian genocide remain largely unexplored subject, still awaiting serious scholarly attention. The Armenian language sources of the period, particularly those preserved in the IRF, Armenian Revolutionary Federation Archive in Boston, have yet to be fully introduced into academic circulations. From the documents, some of the documents I was able to look into them, documents preserved in the IRF archive, we understand that the serious relation began to develop between Kurdish and Armenian movement IRF after immediately 1920. In November 1924, a secret treaty consisted of 23 articles was signed between IRF and the Kurdish National Committee, providing for a joint struggle against the Turkish state on the basis of mutual respect for each party's territorial rights. In the same archive, there are also several letters exchanged between Rupen Termatosyan, the Central Committee member of IRF, and the President of Kurdistan, Sheikh Said Zadeh, between August and October 1925. These letters, the President of Kurdistan's Sheikh Said Zadeh, probably most likely written by Sheikh Said's son Ali Rıza, reiterate that the Sheikh Said uprising had received no support from any foreign power and was a national liberation struggle aimed at securing the independence of Kurdistan. They emphasized that both people had endured, Armenian and Kurds, similar suffering and pursued the same ultimate goal. The latter placed particular importance on a call for solidarity and mutual assistance between the two nations in their common struggle against Turks. Deep distortion. As I noted above, according to the historiography that has prevailed until now, there was no Alevi participation in Sheikh Said movement. Some even claim that Kurdish Alevis sided with the state, Turkish state, alongside with the Turkish state against the uprising. Nuri Dersimi, this is the first individual who developed this idea. Mehmet Sherif Fırat, his book Eastern Provinces and the History of Varto, published by the Turkish Ministry of National Education, played a major role in shaping this view. This thesis, which interprets recent history along the line Alevi-Sunni divide, was widely accepted for its simplicity and was repeated unchanged by subsequent generations. I must confess, I, for many years, taught to my students that the Alawite Kurds and Sunni Kurds never supported each other. I apologize. Because I read in these sources and I thought these are reliable sources and used in my courses. The second source I mentioned in my talk, the oral history records collected by Cemşit Kaya from the Koçuşağı tribe in Dersim, shows that the alleged absence of the Kurdish Alawite participation in the Sheikh Said uprising was nothing more than a myth. In fact, there had been significant Alevi Kurdish involvement, particularly in the Dersim area. The Koçuşağı tribe joined the uprising and seized control over several villages and towns. After the rebellion was suppressed, their homes and villages were destroyed. Many were forcibly resettled or exiled to Kayseri. Jeşmi's family also along with, where some perished from cold and hunger. Following the suppression of Sheikh Said rebellion, the largest trial opened against the Koçuşağı tribe by the Independence Tribunal in Diyarbakir. Can you imagine? The largest, the biggest court case in the entire Sheikh Said period was against an Alevi group. There were around 500 defendants, and this is, nobody mentions these. Only my friend in the Facebook page over the years tried to explain the fact that what his tribe really experienced over the years. We learned from this source that indeed not only Koçuşağı tribe, but the entire western Dersim tribes joined in the rebellion. There was also Alevi participation in other regions. One of the important case is Hasan Hayri, a deputy in Turkish parliament in 1920s. He was sentenced to death, hold an important significant in this trial, together with Sheikh Sherif, Sheikh Said's appointed commander of the Elazığ front. Hasan Hayri tried to organize the participation of Dersim region in the rebellion. He was later arrested and executed in November 22, 1925. This is another historic reality. So, if there was indeed a significant Assyrian and Alevi participation in the Sheikh Said rebellion, and if the trial opened against Koçuşağı tribe was the largest of the Sheikh Said related trials, and if a considerable number of Armenians were executed or summarily killed without any trial, why did these simple realities not play a role at all in historiography? Why were these facts ignored and condemned to oblivion? Three interrelated reasons help to explain this. The first reason is that historical truths are often distorted or erased under ideological and political pressure. The memoirs of those who participated directly or indirectly in the Sheikh Said movement marked by silence, omission, or distortion must be understood in this context. The actors sought to shape the past in ways that serve the future that they imagined. Memoirs, after all, among the most powerful instruments for constructing collective identity and mobilizing political purposes. Mustafa Kemal's famous speech, Nutuk, a 6-day, 36-hour oration, is a striking example for this. The remaining two reasons stem from the nature of historiography itself. The first concerns the prevailing structure of writing on the late Ottoman and early Republic period, which has long been dominated by a perspective centered almost entirely on a single ethno-religious group, Kurds, Armenian, Assyrians, Circassians, and built around their narrative. These narratives are built around the relationship between that group, Circassian, Armenians, Kurds, and the Turkish ethno-national group or Turkish state. We have a two-actor based approach to history. And other communities appears only on the margins as passive figures who surface only if necessary. Otherwise, totally they gone in oblivion. As Mao Zedong observed, this is a quote that I read in my youth age from him, everyone sings on their own mountain, unaware of the songs echoing from the others. Armenian, Greek, Kurdish, Circassian, and Turkish historiographical traditions have developed largely in isolation, each following its own trajectory. As a result, historiography has fragmented into compartmentalized narratives that rarely intersect. The second major historiographical problem is the tendency to treat 1923, the foundation of Turkish Republic, and by extension the period from 1918-1923 as a radical rupture, a kind of point zero in historical writing. In Ottoman-Turkish Kurdish historiography, these years, 1918-1923, are framed almost exclusively through the lens of war of liberation, as if entirely severed from what came before. Yet, throughout the early Republican period, and especially during the Kurdish uprisings between 1918-1938, there were maybe around 20 different or 4 or 5 major Kurdish uprisings. The legacy of the massacres against Ottoman Christians during the First War continued to cast a long, it was never mentioned, but these legacies was always present there, and I will give you a couple examples. All actors of the period operated under the weight of these past. Turkish officials, for instance, repeatedly reminded their opponent, above all the Kurds, that what had happened to the Armenians would also happen to them if they continued to resist. These reminders played a decisive role in shaping Kurdish reaction, actually, to the emerging Turkish state between 1918-1938. Let us briefly look some examples. In the Koçgiri uprising, 1920-21 and 22, one of the sparks was an order by Nurettin Pasha, commander of the Central Army, established in January 1921 to suppress the Koçgiri rebellion and the Pontus Greeks in Black Sea area. He demanded from his commander and the from the civil officials a map detailing the information of the population numbers of the non-Muslims, I underline, of the non-Muslims living in the districts and villages under his army's jurisdiction. One district governor, when forwarding the order, added that Alevi Kurdish population should also be listed. News of this addition spread tremendously, very quickly, among the Alevite Kurds, who already feared they would share the Armenians' fate, and in February-March, an army officers sent to calm the tension among Alevite Kurds reportedly told the villagers, the Kurdish villagers, putting a paper out from his pocket saying that, quote, "Here is your death warrant. I will liken you to the Armenians and annihilate you," end quote. Kurds organized their uprising. This was the beginning, this was the reason why they really started armed struggle against Turkish government. The words, a similar dynamic played in Dersim region, where the population held a deep conviction, this is from a Turkish report, that they too would be annihilated like Armenians. Tahsin Uzer, the third Inspector General, observed in 1936 report, quote, "The belief among the Dersim people that they will share the fate of the Armenian is not new. This belief is as strong and as old as a faith among Kurds." On January 4th, 1937, the Turkish Ministry of Interior sent a coded order to the provincial governors to counter rumors that the government will deport Kurds and massacre the Kurds like the Armenians. This is a central order. The words attributed Abdullah Alpdoğan, I put here on slide, one of the principal perpetrators of the Dersim genocide, clearly indicate that Turkish officials viewed the Dersimlis through the same lens, the lens of Armenians and Armenian genocide. This is a quote from him. "These Kızılbaş bastards," I'm sorry for the language, "are the descendants of the traitors. We eradicated the roots of the Armenian bastards. Only these Kurds and Kızılbaş remained. The government, our president, has given the order to burn and destroy. No one will be persecuted for what you do." So the immunity to the soldier. Go and kill. There is a green light from the president, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, which is true, actually. We can confirm these from other sources. Early Republican historiography almost entirely ignored this connection between the wartime genocide against Armenians and the Christians and the events that followed after 1918. It severed the link between Armenian genocide and post-1918 developments, treating the pre-war period as if it had never existed. What is needed now is to restore this broken continuity without reintegrating the destruction of the Christian population, especially the Armenians, into the post-1918 historiography. A genuine understanding of the era is impossible, remains impossible. So here my latest some theoretical observation. As we know, reality is fundamentally plural. The past was lived through the intertwined actions of many different actors. What divides this whole into parts and confines it within national, ethnic, or different disciplinary compartments is historiography itself. To put it more sharply, historical totality is ontological, actually, but fragmentation is historiographical. It is not the past that is divided, It is our way narrating the past divides it. By its nature, historiography cannot capture the full plurality of the past and offer a complete account of it. What we have instead are many narratives, each highlighting different aspects. This selectivity is not a weakness. It is part of how history works. It is how we write history. Any new historiography must accept this condition rather than imagine it can transcend it. So I cannot here speak for a total, the historiography that total covers everything. It is impossible. In history writing, what we can do is to develop approaches that shed light on particular aspects of history, approaches shaped actually by the question we ask. Everything begins with the question. Which question you are asking and what answer you want to get for your questions. And these questions in turn reflect the values, of course our values, and our concern, our time's values and concerns determines our questions, and based on these questions that we ask, we look into the history. This selectivity gives each generation, this is a positive thing actually, because this selectivity gives each generation the chance to see new dimensions of the past. The problem then is not that historians divide the past into the part, but that this fragmented view can make some realities disappear. This is a problem. That is exactly what we see in the prevailing narratives of Sheikh Said event. The problem we need to address is the tension between the plural nature of what happened and the selective attitude of historiography that freezes this plurality. To explain this problem, I turn to Hannah Arendt. Arendt reminds us that unlike nature, the world is not given. It must be constructed and sustained. It exists only through material, not only through material structures, but more importantly, through the ephemeral and fragile web of human relations. The networks of events, facts, and situations born of human actions, says Arendt. This web gains meaning only when recorded and remembered through narrative, whether in official historiography, novels, individual judgment, or public debate. Otherwise, events lose all impact and may be entirely forgotten. This reminds of how fragile historical truth in reality is. Hannah Arendt explains this fragility through a distinction, which is very important to understand the entire problematic, between factual truth and rational truth. Rational truth, mathematical, scientific, or philosophical truth, can be rediscovered, even if forgotten or denied. Einstein's relativity theory. Somebody will definitely discover these in the future. Factual truths, however, the truth that arise from human action within the web of human relationship, cannot be recovered, or once lost or left unrecorded. They exist only as long as they are documented and preserved through narratives. If an event is not recorded, then in historical terms, that event is deemed non-existent. This is the problem that historian faces. My main argument is that the historiography dominating our field has precisely this tendency to forget and ignore the ephemeral and fragile web of human relationship. What we need instead, a historical approach which I call integrated history, that makes these forgotten webs visible again and restores the obscure experiences to the public sphere. In other words, we need a new historiography capable of rediscovering the web of human relationship that existing narratives have condemned to disappearance. Such an approach is essential not only for understanding the past, but also a precondition for imagining the future. One of the prerequisites for such historiography is the capacity of imagination. Then I'm turning to Immanuel Kant, the famous German philosopher. The ability to grasp the plurality of the past. And Immanuel Kant described this, what he called erweiterte Denkungsart, or enlarged thinking. For Kant, sound judgment depends not only on individual consistency, but also on the ability to visit the perspectives of others and integrate them into one's own reasoning. The capacity of each individual or community to inhabit the perspective of the others is essential condition for restructuring the plurality of the past. Only through such enlarged thinking can we recover and make visible the experience silenced by fragmented historical narrative confined within separate silos. As the German historian, this is the third individual that I'm using his theoretical approach, Reinhard Koselleck emphasized, the way a society conceptualizes the past determines the limits of its vision of future. The manner in which we grasp the past either narrows or expands the possibilities for imagining the future. The realistic boundaries of our political, social, and economic action in the present are shaped by these very conceptions. Thus, as long as we view the past through fragmented, one-dimensional narratives, our imaginative capacity for the future remains constrained. What we need is, as Koselleck also underlines, a regional historiography, leaving aside for now the question of how its boundaries might be drawn, this regional historiography, that restores to us the plurality of the past by replacing single actor narratives with a more comprehensive approach. Drawing on Koselleck's concept of space of experience, so not experience of each group, but space of experiences, describing a space, including all its members. Space of experiences, I call this new approach as integrated history. Such a historiography will not only make visible the complex intertwined experiences of the past, but also help us reflect on how diverse national, ethnic, and religious groups might coexist and build a shared future. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Akçam, for that very informative and very interesting approach. And we'll have a chance to ask some questions at the end of our panel. At this point, I would like to invite my colleague, Dr. Ümit to come up and talk a little bit about his panel. I'm just pulling up his bio a little bit. I would like to read a little bit of his biography. So Dr. Ümit Kurt is an associate professor of history and an affiliate of the Center for the Study of Violence at the University of Newcastle in New South Wales, Australia. He's a historian of the modern Middle East with a research focus on intercommunal violence, forced displacement, and economic dispossession. He received his doctorate degree from Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts, and he's held postdoc positions at the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at Harvard, the Polonsky Academy at the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute, and was a visiting professor here at Fresno State a few years ago. He's a prolific author, and he's written a work called The Armenians of Aintab, The Economics of Genocide in an Ottoman Province, which was published by Harvard University in 2021 and won the Dr. Sona Aronian Book Prize for Excellence in Armenian Studies. So Dr. Kurt, please come up to moderate our second panel. Thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone. It's so happy to be back home, actually, I would say. And thank you so much, Professor Akçam, for eye-opening and fascinating, actually, keynote. So I believe it will enable us to discuss the matter in details with your questions as well. And so I would like to actually introduce our two speakers and two colleagues. So I would like to start with Professor Janet Klein from University of Akron. So Janet Klein received her undergraduate degree from the University of Montana and her master's and PhD from Princeton University. Her book, The Margins of the Empire, Kurdish Militias in the Ottoman Tribal Zone, was published by Stanford University Press in 2011 and translated into Turkish in 2013. And Professor Klein has also authored numerous articles and book chapters on various topics related to late Ottoman and the post-Ottoman Kurdish and Armenian histories. And she teaches courses on the modern Middle East and the Ottoman Empire, as well as on such topics: nationalism, identity politics, mass violence, borderlands, partitions, and the minority and minoritization in the late Ottoman Empire within the framework of Armenians and Kurds. And she's also a founding member and associate editor of the Kurdish Studies Journal as well. So without further ado, I would like to invite Janet to give her presentation.
We are going to use the desk for Q&A, right?
Yeah. You want to sit?
You can sit.
If you want to sit.
Doesn't.
Yeah.
Whatever you
So should I just, so will Michael be up here too?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah, if you
at the same time? Or,
yeah.
or should I just go up here?
Whatever you
I don't care.
Okay, yes. That's all right.
Thank you so much to Barlo and Ümit for inviting me. It's hard, it's always a difficult thing to follow Taner Akçam. And I'm going old school today, no PowerPoint. So I think that what I am going to present though is somewhat related in a way to what Dr. Akçam has just presented, so bear with me there. So Kurds and Armenians are two Ottoman groups who have lived through settler colonial violence or something akin to it. Both Armenians and Kurds were minoritized and subjected to genocidal violence as the colonial state sought permanent security. These two peoples, who as neighbors naturally had interconnected histories, saw their centuries of coexistence as brothers of land and water shattered in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. I would not have been able to understand the Kurds and Armenians' entwined histories and to rewrite major aspects of their entangled stories or even offer this framing of their stories without the memoirs and diaries of state officials, Ottoman Kurds, Ottoman Armenians, and others. Some of the memoirs were essential not only because I was denied all access to all state archives in Turkey for years, but because the story fragments that I was able to glean from these memoirs, reading them directly and against the grain, told me a different account of their interlinked dynamics than earlier Orientalist, nationalist, and colonial versions of events that unfolded in Ottoman Kurdistan or Armenia /Armenia in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Turkish nationalist colonial narratives have sought to erase Kurds and Armenians from their national stories. Kurds and Armenians in Turkey today are not just fighting the erasure of their identities, the erasure of their histories in the Ottoman past, but their communities continue to see new generational scars of trauma layered upon past ones. After all, settler colonialism and its attending mass violence is not an event or even a set of events, as Patrick Wolf reminds us, but is a structure that persists. Thus, as we discuss this past from our present-day vantage point, we need to remember that there's a false periodization implied by the term post-colonial, as colonialism lives on. So today, I'd like to explore how two select texts that I've picked, the memoir of an Armenian revolutionary and the diary of an Ottoman official, can offer healing justice to our understanding of the interconnected Kurdish and Armenian past in the late Ottoman period by grounding our readings of them in a post-Ottoman space that is nonetheless not post-colonial, and by interrupting the false binaries and teleologies that mainstream histories used to offer. So I began my work on Kurdish history when I was in graduate school, and there were very few scholarly studies on the Kurds at that time. I'm old. Kurds appeared when they were recognized as such, as backwards, nomadic menaces to settled people. Most scholarship portrayed the Ottoman Empire, into which the majority of Kurds were incorporated in the 16th century, as an entity where change was propelled from the center. Peripheries like Kurdistan were influenced by the more important dynamics emanating from this center, but were not agents in their creation. Kurds were the objects of colonial civilizing and settling missions in the late Ottoman period. They emerged from World War I without a state of their own. They were abandoned by Allied powers, denied their Kurdish identity by the Turkish state, and had no friends but the mountains. So my journey through a variety of sources brought me to try to bring much deserved nuance to both Kurdish history, the oft-told tropes of which I just outlined a moment ago, and also Ottoman history, which has been plagued by its own historiographical problems, some of which I'll mention presently. The Kurdish Ottoman press was exceptionally helpful, but so was a variety of travelogues, memoirs, diaries, and other contemporary works by Armenian and Kurdish Ottomans, Ottoman officials, and Europeans alike. Some of you may know that I was banned from all state archives in Turkey for years. Thus, these published sources were really important for my research, especially some certain memoirs and diaries. And I came to realize that they provided different angles from what I could have gotten and eventually did gather from various archives. So today I'd just like to discuss two such works. One is by Ruben / Minas Terminaciones, Memoirs d'un partisan arménien, Memoirs of an Armenian freedom fighter, and there are French and English translations which are a little different from each other. And the second one is Saadettin Pasha's Anıları, memoirs, but I would more accurately translate that as diaries here. So through careful reading of each work, in conjunction with other sources, of course, I've been able to make unique contributions to the study of Kurdish, Armenian, Ottoman historical dynamics despite my limited access to archival sources for a long time. So if I were able to boil it down, these memoirs, when read with and against the grain of other sources, have helped me write about the ways in which Kurdish society and Armenian society were deeply interconnected in the Ottoman era, and how the tangled dynamics that unfolded in the late Ottoman period were not peripheral to Ottoman history, but were central to it and should be studied accordingly. So in the documents from the Ottoman archives that I was finally able to see, both Armenians and Kurds are frequently viewed as unruly and or dangerous subjects to be conquered and or reconquered, controlled and punished. In the British and French archives, Kurds are central culprits in the story of Armenian and other Christians suffering violence, dispossession, and other depredations at the hands of their Muslim neighbors. Yet even in these sources, you can read against the grain to arrive at a more complex picture of a more complex and complicated relationship. So in my book, The Margins of Empire, Kurdish Militias in the Ottoman Tribal Zone, I explored the ways in which the Ottoman state empowered a group that they ultimately wished to settle and control, Kurds, to disperse, weaken, and decimate a different group, Armenians, that they saw at that moment as more threat. The state did this in part by creating the Hamidiye Light Cavalry, which deputized certain Kurdish tribes to police Kurdistan, Armenia, against the threat of Armenian revolutionary activity. So this militia wreaked havoc on the region, particularly in the borderland parts of Kurdistan, where Armenians formed a significant part of the population, and where Armenian revolutionaries were active not only in Armenian nationalist activities, but in striving to protect Armenian peasants from violence at the hands of Kurdish tribes and Circassian immigrants seeking to take over their movable and immovable properties. Indeed, it was the memoir of an Armenian revolutionary known as Ruben, which helped me understand the ways in which the relationships between Kurds and Armenians, and even the state-empowered Kurdish tribes and their Armenian adversaries, did not always proceed in expected ways. So, Minas Terminasian, also known as Ruben, was a well-known fedai, or Armenian revolutionary, born in 1882 in a small village in present-day Georgia, to parents who'd moved there from Erzurum following the Russo-Ottoman War of 1877-78. He engaged in Armenian revolutionary activity in different parts of Ottoman Armenia, Kurdistan. And after the war and the genocide, which he survived, he eventually relocated to Iran, and he lived in different parts of Europe until his death in Paris in 1951. So his memoirs were published in serial form, first in the Armenian Journal of Boston, Hayrani, between 1922 and 1930, and again 1944, 1952. And segments of his very voluminous memoirs, some 2,700 pages, have subsequently been released in French and English, although as I mentioned before, the two volumes are a little bit different. So first, Ruben's memoir helped me establish why Kurdish tribes in certain regions were targeted for enrollment in the Hamidiye over others, as he described the cross-border routes that Armenian revolutionaries followed to smuggle weapons into the empire. In other words, his work was really important for me for mapping of the Hamidiye and understanding why the map looked the way that it did. And now I'm kind of sorry for not making a PowerPoint. Especially interesting to me, however, are the ways in which Terminasian's memoir reveal the complex set of relationships Kurds and Armenians engaged in. Yes, there was violence and dispossession, to be sure, but these were not age-old sectarian conflicts. Kurdish tribes were empowered by the state because they were Muslim, true, but more importantly, it was not only Europeans who viewed the Kurds as being inherently antagonistic to the settled largely Christian population. Ottoman officials did as well. And they viewed Kurds as tribal, nomadic, uncivilized, and naturally fit for service against Armenians because of their innate hostility to them. But less than acting on any kind of inborn hostility, we see a conflict over resources that was weaponized by the state, which resulted in the widespread dispossession of Armenians, as well as some Kurdish peasants, a process that Terminassian also describes. So through memoirs such as his, we see these dynamics, and we also observe the ways in which both Armenian and Kurdish villagers banded together to resist the usurpation of their property. The two groups may have found themselves at odds in other arenas, but we also see them come together as indigenous groups when the Ottoman state worked to settle Circassians, whom they saw as foreigners, as proxy colonists on their land. So in this memoir, we also witness how these deputized Kurdish tribes didn't always behave as they were supposed to. Kurds and Armenians were actually trading and selling weapons to each other. And this included Armenian revolutionaries and the Hamidiye militia members, the precise people who had been tasked with the job of suppressing Armenian revolutionary activity. In fact, sometimes the Hamidiye Kurds helped the Armenian revolutionaries cross the borders. So they certainly weren't behaving the way they were supposed to, and memoirs help us see that. And lastly, for now, Terminassian recalls on several occasions the hospitality and assistance they received from the Kurds. He believed that many Kurds, who he claimed held powerful people, regardless of their religion, in high esteem, thus were drawn to the Armenian leader Kevork. According to Rubin, the Toruns, the Aghas, and Hamidiye soldiers gathered around him to express their sympathies or to see this man who had defied the government for 20 years and was still alive. The revolutionaries also played into what they perceived as the Kurdish love for stories of combat and glory, and because they sang their songs of heroic battles to impress the Kurds, many Kurdish songs also came to recount the deeds of Armenian revolutionaries. The revolutionaries even forged some alliance with Ibrahim Pasha, who was the formidable Hamidiye commander in the province of Diyarbakir, in order to secure, among other things, the migration of Armenian peasants to his district. Thus, a central finding of my subsequent book was that the violence between Kurds and Armenians, and especially against Armenians, was not part of some age-old ethnic or religious tensions, but was over something concrete, this being land and other resources, but also that the relationships that Kurds and Armenians had were complex and contingent. Memoirs such as those by Rubin were very helpful to me in writing about this history. However, my continued research into the dynamics of mass violence led me to circle back to the conflictual dynamics between Kurds and Armenians, but from a different angle this time, the minoritization of Armenians and later Kurds, which turned out to be, as I argue, an interrelated process. Especially helpful here has been the diary of one Sadettin Pasha. So Sadettin was born in 1851 to a father who was in the Ottoman service. Defterdarlı Mehmet Şükrü Efendi, who worked in the Office of Finance. So Sadettin pursued a military career, and he held a variety of posts in the 2 decades before being charged in 1895 with heading an inspection commission to investigate the violence that was unfolding against Armenians in the Erzurum, Bitlis, and Van regions, which was attracting European attention and which served as a pretext for additional great power intervention in the internal Ottoman affairs in the shape of a reform package for the 6 Armenian provinces, now designated as such. So during this time, Sadettin wrote a diary with daily entries which included events and meetings with local Armenians and Kurds that he apparently did not include in his official correspondence with his official telegrams and reports to the capital. Sami Önal republished Saadettin Pasha's diary from his mission to Van and surrounding areas in 1896. So this came out 22 years ago. So in his diary, Saadettin Pasha describes his meetings with local Armenians, but especially with Kurds, the latter whom he was tasked with convincing to go along with the 1895 reform program, one of several Armenian reform packages that Great Britain and Russia, along with France, imposed on the empire. His diary recounts how, during these gatherings he held with Kurdish tribes, he informed them that the world was watching the region very closely because of the recent spate of anti-Armenian massacres, and that it would not be good for the empire, and thus for them, if Europeans meddled further in the empire's affairs and shamed the Kurds in the process by alleging that they didn't believe in the caliphate. Here we see how Saadettin's diary may be regarded as a narrative of counterinsurgency against both Armenians and Kurds. I'll comment on that later. But some of his offhand remarks that he just kind of jots down in his diary also help us understand rumors about the fate of Ottoman Kurdistan if the reform programs went further. Since I and others have detailed at length elsewhere the ways in which these reform programs, which were ostensibly designed to reduce anti-Armenian violence, actually had the opposite effect, one of whom it just gave you a wonderful talk. Here I'll just touch on some of the ways that Saadettin Pasha's diaries helped me observe and write about the process through which Ottoman Armenians became minoritized, followed by Ottoman and post-Ottoman Kurds. So a minoritized group, what's that? It commonly refers to a social group that is devalued in society and given less access to its resources. This devaluing encompasses how the group is represented, what degree of access to resources it is granted, and how the unequal access is rationalized. Traditionally, a group in this position has been referred to as a minority group, and I think we're all more familiar with that term. However, this language has been replaced with the term minoritized in order to capture the active dynamics that create the lower status in society, and also to signal that a group's status is not necessarily related to how many or how few of them are in the population at large. That's a quote. So in my research, I focused on the historical process through which Armenians and in an interconnected process, later Kurds, became minorities in the late Ottoman period and post-Ottoman states. Instead of the understanding of minoritization that I've just cited, I think of minoritization as a process, not just through which a group is devalued and under-resourced, but instead is turned into an existential threat to the nation. They become a permanent other, a marked citizen, as the historian Yanandra Pandey, who's worked on India, might call them. So in this investigation, I've hoped to rectify the common assumption, even among many seasoned Ottomanists, that non-dominant religious groups and even sometimes non-Turkish ethno-linguistic groups were minorities long before the concept even existed. In other words, it's ahistorical. So Saadettin Pasha's diaries, read alongside other sources like Kurdish, Armenian, and state sources, have helped me track this process of minoritization. Kurds and Armenians alike couldn't help but see how they were regarded by the state as the us of the majority and the them of the minority, respectively, in the lectures that Saadettin Pasha recounts he gave members of each group. He addressed Kurds as co-religionists, as the empire-wide dominant group or majority. He reminded them of their local majorityhood through population numbers. I mean, he just threw out numbers. They weren't necessarily accurate, but he spoke to them about their nativity to the region, their unique ties, their rights to be on and even in the land. To Armenians, he emphasized their numerical inferiority and how if the state withdrew protection, they'd be left at the hands of the Kurdish tribes, and who knows what will happen to you then. He's kind of hinting, or recounting in his diary, his kind of interactions there. Incidentally, in these interactions, he showed us that he didn't really think of the Kurds as the we of the nation. So it wasn't just a matter of implying Kurds were the we for effect, and Armenians were the they to Kurds, however. A significant part of the minoritization process was constructing the Armenians as a group that threatened the territorial integrity of the empire, Ottoman sovereignty, the empire's continued existence as such. So we know the larger empire-wide effect the sphere had on the state and the role that it played in waves of anti-Armenian violence, culminating in the genocide that began in 1915 and played out for years afterwards. But what Saadettin Pasha's diary helps us to understand is how Van area Kurds had their own interpretations of these threats. Kurds from across the region believed, in fact, that the Ottoman government would be complicit in handing the region over to Armenians for their own beylik, their own principality state, however they interpreted that. And of course, Saadettin Pasha recounts in his diary that he really tried to dispel this notion. Kurds were afraid that they would fall under Armenian rule, becoming a minoritized group in this supposed Armenian beylik, and susceptible to vengeance for their own anti-Armenian violence. As we know from the literature on genocide and ethnic cleansing, often the thing feared may not be existent or even plausible, but the fear that impels the violence is real. To paraphrase Saul Friedlander, in order for the Ottoman Empire, or here the Kurds, to live, Armenians had to die or otherwise be removed from the region. From Saadettin Pasha's diaries, we learn the unique local reaction to and indeed contribution to these dynamics, which he believed was the result of propaganda by the Van notables and gendarmes. While Saadettin Pasha was seemingly on a mission to counter such propaganda and to quell anti-Armenian violence for the sake of thwarting what the state saw as Euro-Armenian designs on the region, there were moments that he recalled telling the Kurds, "This earth is yours, protect it from the Armenians. Even though they are less populous than you, they're going to steal your land right out from under you. Get your act together." Apparently, he couldn't resist a bit of instigation during his ostensible mission to keep a lid on Kurdish violence and to remind Kurds that they shouldn't take matters into their own hands, that the government would handle it just fine on their own. After all, the state wanted to employ select Kurdish tribes and to channel and control the violence against Armenians such that the state, and the state alone, with its deputized forces, had the monopoly on violence. So these are some snippets of the ways in which select memoirs and diaries have helped me rethink earlier historians' assumptions about Kurdish-Armenian relations, center-periphery dynamics, and Ottoman citizenship. So, kind of in a conclusion, the two sources I've discussed today are different kinds of sources, even though they appear to be in the same genre. They should be submitted to different kinds of critical scrutiny. It's not only the difference between memoir and diary. As Birinci puts it, memoir is determination of the traces of life experience and impressions, and in that way it's very different from a diary agenda. If a diary is the identification and a photograph of the day, then memoirs are photographs of the whole life or part of the life which are taken subsequently from the traces of the person's mind. There are further differences which I'll elaborate more on in the chapter to come. But for now, it's important to note that Rubin's memoir was meant by the author to serve as a kind of history of the Armenian Revolutionary Federation and its activities. But the little details it offers, kind of in an offhand way, they don't seem to be offered to boost any one person or organization's image. In fact, some of the details that I've picked up on and described here seem to be somewhat incidental to his story. So they appear to be credible to the historian. Saadettin Pasha's diary seems to have been written for his own record. The things he recorded were not in the reports that he sent to the capital, but he was a state official, a military official, serving in the capacity of someone who was tasked with quelling insurgencies. And as such, we also need to read his diary as a text of counterinsurgency, a reading strategy developed by the Subaltern Studies Group in the 1980s, actually. His entries help us to see how Ottoman officials viewed Kurds and Armenians, how they interpreted the links between domestic and international threats, and how they sought to deal with them. But we also need to remember our own positionality in the reading of these texts from a post-Ottoman vantage point that is nonetheless not post-colonial, where the histories of Turkey's key minoritized groups continue to be subject to erasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. It's really fascinating presentation, and also actually unique enterprise to read parallel the one memoir and one diary, Saadettin Pasha. I think it's the very first attempt to read Saadettin Pasha alongside a memoir of an Armenian intellectual and politician. So it's quite interesting. Thank you. So our second speaker is Professor Provence, Michael Provence. He teaches modern Middle East history, focusing on the 20th century Arab East. He received the BA in history from UC Berkeley and the PhD from University of Chicago. During 2017 and 18, he was a research fellow in residence, Institut de Nantes, France. In 2010 and 11 and 2014, Professor Provence was an Alexander von Humboldt Fellow and Zentrum Moderner Orient in Berlin. In 2024 and 25, he's a visiting professor at the University of Paris, Sorbonne. And he's the author of 2 books and many articles. The books are the very 2 prominent books, The Great Syrian Revolt and the Rise of Arab Nationalism in 2005, and The Last Ottoman Generation and the Making of the Modern Middle East in 2017, both available in Arabic and Turkish languages. And Professor Provence lived and studied over the course of many years in several Middle Eastern countries, particularly Syria and Lebanon between 1918 and 2006. So he returns as often as possible. And so it's my great pleasure to call Mr. Provence.
It's a great pleasure to be here, and I want to record my gratitude to Dr. Kurt and Professor
Murgerdician.
It's closer. I'll get better over the weekend.
Yes, we
I'll
will.
get better. This is my goal. So it's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for the invitation. I've got a very hard act to follow this evening, and the generosity of the Fresno State and the Armenian Studies program has my deep gratitude. I begged Barlow to let me change my title, and he consented. So I changed my title from Surprises in the Memoirs of Arab Ottoman Officers, and then to How Damned Defenders of Doomed Empires Became Heroes of the Nation. Sounds like a Quentin Tarantino movie, I think, in reflection. Too much. But I realized not too long ago that I didn't really want to talk about either of these things. And that I was tired of Ottoman soldiers and officers and men of violence, to tell you the truth. And so the title and my protagonist this evening is this gentleman, Fedis al-Huri, who I'm going to tell you about. And so we could use as a title, an Ottoman Arab Unionist Dissenter. So that's the working title now. He was all those things. He's a much, I think, a more inspiring protagonist than any of the soldiers I've spent my time studying in the past, Ottoman soldiers, including very famous ones. He was famous as a Syrian politician, a beloved, honest politician in the 30s and 40s and 50s. He was a defender of humane values, decency. He was never damned. He was a defender, but of humane values, not the nation. Well, maybe. He was damned except for, I guess he was damned by Jamal Pasha. I'll get to that in a minute. Which, of course, is a distinction in its own right. Jamal Pasha, the Syrians called Sifa, the bloodshedder.
Butcher.
The butcher, yeah. So he was a Syrian prime minister. He was a Presbyterian. He was the first Syrian ambassador to the United Nations. He was an attendee and signatory to the United Nations Charter in San Francisco in 1945. He became world famous in his activities there. His stirring oration was broadcast around the world by radio. He received a doctorate, an honorary doctorate from the University of Southern California when it was, well, never mind. We won't say anything nasty about USC. I'm going to restrain myself. He was a brave and relentless critic of French colonialism and sectarianism in Syria, and he helped bring healthy, fresh water, publicly funded, to every Damascene household in the 1930s. But before all of that, before all of those things took place, he was a self-taught lawyer of a very modest background and an enthusiastic supporter of the 1908 Ottoman constitutional restoration. He was a believer and an adherent of freedom and democracy and freedom of the press and all these things that the constitutional restoration was promised to deliver. And he became the founder of the first unionist party, open unionist party, in Damascus in 1908. And then he became a dissident unionist and a defector from the party and an unlikely candidate for deputy to parliament from Damascus. Despite the fact that he was a Protestant and there was no quota, and so he competed against the most famous and wealthy and notable Ottoman Muslims in Damascus, the Azams and the Azmes and people like this, and he won in 1912. So he went to the Ottoman Parliament and served in the Parliament, and he was a courageous figure in the Parliament, including attempting to aid and support his Armenian fellow deputies. And this is the fascinating part of his story that I'm going to talk about today. His career in Parliament and this heroic or unsuccessful attempt to to really speak for and save his fellow parliamentary deputies, the two Armenian intellectuals. So Feris al-Huri was born in 1877 in a town called Kafir, which is near Hasbaya in the eastern Lebanon mountains, in what is today Lebanon. Sorry?
Close to Anja.
No, well, yes, close to Anja, very close to Hasbaya, actually. So anyway, he was born there. It's an Orthodox town, but his grandparents or his parents converted to Presbyterianism, and so he walked to the Sidon American Boys School, which is still there in Sidon in southern Lebanon. He walked, and he went to school there as a scholarship boy, and was very successful in school, and graduated in 1890, and then was offered a scholarship to the American University of Beirut, except for there was a cholera epidemic. So he had to walk almost around the entirety of Lebanon to escape the quarantine and get there, which he did. He was an oldest son, and he had 5 siblings, and he eventually became responsible for all 5 of his siblings. And so at AUB, at the American or the Syrian Protestant College, then he was a very successful student, and he won prizes for poetry in Arabic and oration and mathematics, and then he immediately became a teacher afterwards. So he had to support those siblings. So he went to Damascus, not to Beirut, after he graduated. First he was a teacher for a while. He became a translator for the British Embassy, received British consular protection, this is important, and became a salesman for the Gresham Life Insurance Company. And in this way he was able to sell enough life insurance policies that in the space of about 2 years he had earned enough money that he could provide for the education of all 5 of his siblings, which he did. His brother also became a quite famous Syrian lawyer. And then he started in 1908 the first Unionist Party with Abdurrahman Shabandar, another graduate of the Syrian Protestant College, and taught himself first Ottoman himself in the evenings as a self-taught student, and then French, and then the law. So he was unaccredited in all of these areas. Eventually, he was delivering public, orations in Turkish in the Ottoman Parliament. He resigned, or he gave up his British consular protection in order to run for the Ottoman Parliament in 1912. I should say that he quit the Unionist Party in 1912 over his objection that the Unionist Party had become a anti-democratic, what we would call a gerrymandering party of Turkish Muslim privilege against the interests of the other members of the country. But in 1914, when he was 40, he nominated himself for the Ottoman Parliament. He couldn't run as a Unionist. He wasn't a Unionist. And as I said, he ran in the general list against Muslim Damascenes of famous families. He said he learned the law in the Ottoman Parliament. This is all from his memoirs, which were published about 1950, and I found in a Beirut bookstore a couple of years ago. And he entered the Ottoman Law College while a parliamentarian, but he was tried by Jamal Pasha, and he had to cut short his studies. So he never actually received a law degree, despite later becoming the author of the Syrian Constitution, the founder of the Damascus University Law School, and the preeminent constitutional lawyer in Syria and a member of the United Nations. But in Parliament, and that's the heart of our story tonight, and what I want to get to, and get to quickly, so that you don't get frustrated with me, because it's getting a little late here. He complained bitterly about the Turkish chauvinism that was increasingly on display in the Unionist regime. But Talat Pasha convinced him to rejoin the party in the period right before the First World War. He became an institutionalist, a constitutionalist, I should say, and he advocated, not only then, but his whole life, the rights of citizens and the construction and protection of transparent, fair, open public institutions. And he knew how to argue a case. And he insisted that the law serve and protect citizens and everyone, not only the rich and the well-connected, and that the law existed to protect the rights of citizens against the power of capital and against the power of the state. In Parliament, he gave a scathing speech in Turkish on the poor condition of public services in the Arab provinces, which caused a kind of a sensation of scathing attacks against him, against the poor quality of the Ottoman postal service, against the incompetence of the telegraph operators who were illiterate in the languages of the regions of the empire they were made to serve. And he also demanded in Parliament to know the circumstances of two famous Armenian deputies who had disappeared and had been replaced in Parliament. And I think this is a story that some here may know. These two deputies that were sent to Diyarbakir and yes, exactly. Kraykor Zohrab, yeah, and Barkas Saguridin. So these two individuals, these two parliamentary deputies, had signed a petition asking for the release of arrested Armenians in 1915. And they were indicted by the court and sent to Diyarbakir in the train. And along the way, they disappeared, presumed assassinated, but there was no definitive proof on any case. So after some time in the parliament, according to Feres's memoirs, these empty seats of these two missing deputies were announced to be reoccupied by other deputies who would be appointed by the government. And Feres submitted an official request to know the disposition, this is in the middle of the war, it's 1915, to know the disposition of the holders of the empty seats. So in other words, he demanded that the government explain what had happened to the rightful holders of the two empty parliamentary seats. And the Parliamentary Council agreed with this request. So Talat Pasha was made to appear in the parliament and answer these questions, which he refused to do. And then the government declared a recess in the proceedings, during which time the recess lasted for a week, and the session officially ended. And during this time, the government and government ministers went to Feres and said, "You can't continue with this inquiry. You have to stop. It's going to cause the government embarrassment, and you have to stop." And they wanted to force him to withdraw his inquiry, and he refused to do this. And so the final conclusion of the issue was that he resolved not to attend the parliamentary session because he would not withdraw the inquiry, and it was left to other people to advance the inquiry, which no one did. So it died in the session, and that was the end of it. He refused. He didn't attend the session, and no one took up the question. Now, a bit later, during the spring of 1916, not much later, Jamal Pasha hanged 21 Arab men in Damascus and Beirut, 7 in Damascus and 14 in Beirut. And in that same summer, in 1916, Feres went on summer parliamentary holidays back to Damascus And when he went there, he went with a safe passage from Talat Pasha. But when he arrived, Jamal met him in the Victoria Hotel, which used to be the fancy main hotel in Damascus. It's not there anymore, but there's a bridge that's called Jisr Victoria, which commemorates where it used to be. I don't think many people, not many Damascenes even really realize this, but you know, I'm a historian, so you have to have the details whether you want them or not. Jisr Victoria. So he went to the Victoria Hotel and he was interviewed by Jamal Pasha. And Jamal Pasha said, you know, you've been denounced, and we're going to investigate you. And Faris said, well, I come with the good wishes and the safe passage from Anwar Pasha and from Talat Pasha. And Jamal said, I don't care. The Mufti of the army has denounced you. And this person actually was Yusuf Shukairi, who was the father of Asad Shukairi, who was the father of Ahmed Shukairi, who was the first Secretary General of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Also not a very good guy. That's the one who Abdel Nasser appointed and then Yasser Arafat replaced in 1967. Anyway, like I say, sorry for the details. I can't help myself. So Jamal interrogated Faris personally. And Faris pointed out that he was a founder of the Unionist Party in Damascus, a paragon of the Ottoman parliamentary system. And that he was still a parliamentary deputy and still a party member. And he was interrogated for months and imprisoned and threatened with the gallows, which was the customary punishment at the time. Eventually, he was able to literally argue his way out of the charges because of his legal talent, his rhetorical skill, and he also had some good friends and some powerful friends outside. He said, Ottoman prison was bad, but the authorities were upright and proper, and French mandate prison, which he also experienced repeatedly, was worse, and accompanied by roughness and rudeness that the Ottomans didn't visit upon their prisoners, at least not him. He was eventually freed with the help of Talat Pasha and Sheikh Arslan, among others, and ordered to, in December 1917, he was released from prison and ordered to exit the Fourth Army area, which is to say Syria, and he went to Istanbul. He returned to Damascus on the 18th of September 1918, which was 12 days before the fall, or 14 days before the fall of the city to the British and the Hashemites in 1918. And later he became a minister this is what his parliamentary card would have looked like. This was the card of his friend, Salim Ali Salam, who is the great-grandfather of the current Lebanese Prime Minister, Nawaf Salam. This is a photograph of Faris signing the UN Charter in San Francisco. And there's another picture from the UN. And finally, I'll tell a little short story because I think I'm doing okay on time. Okay. Does anybody know what this is? Nobody knows, of course. No one knows. This is a Syrian palace. This is a Syrian palace that nobody's seen for 60 years. This is the palace of one of the last Ottoman governors, Nazim Pasha, Hussein Nazim Pasha, and this is his palace. And this palace is on the hills above Damascus, and it looks over the entire plain and the gardens and the river valley from the Barada that comes down out of the mountains, and it's a panoramic view from there. So this palace was built by Nazim Pasha, one of the last walis, the last governors. And it became successively the palace of every ruler of Damascus since that time. So, including after Nazim Pasha, Jamal Pasha, and after Jamal Pasha, General Allenby, the British general, and after General Allenby, General Gouraud, the French High Commissioner, and after General Gouraud, a series of Syrian presidents, and it was the personal residence of Bashar al-Assad. And that's why nobody's ever seen it in living memory, because it's been in a closed neighborhood and behind high walls. So this is a photograph from like 4 months ago. So Fares went to dinner with General Gouraud after the French invaded Syria in 1920, and Fares was the minister of finance in that government that the French overturned in 1920. And General Gouraud had a banquet. He called a banquet of the remaining ministers of King Faisal's government in Syria. And he got up from the table and he walked out. And he looked at the view and he said, "This is some view. This is the palace that your King Faisal used to live in, isn't it? You know? But I'm here now," says Gouraud, the French Prime Minister, the French High Commissioner. And Fares says, "Yes, Your Excellency, indeed it is. It is the palace that King Faisal lived in, and now you live here. And before King Faisal, it was Allenby, and before Allenby, it was Jamal Pasha, and before Jamal Pasha, it was Nazim Pasha, and we dined with all of them. We were with all of them at this table right here, Your Excellency. And they're all gone, and we're still here." So this was Fares's, and of course the rest of the meal proceeded in dead silence because there was no answer to this challenge, actually, which was indeed a challenge to not only to General Gouraud but to French colonialism, foreign intervention itself. So my conclusions are that Fares al-Houri flaunted and invited the perils of dissent in an authoritarian state, and he never stopped. And I suppose that after the murder of his colleagues and the disappearance of his parliamentary compatriots and the murder of some of his friends in Damascus, and his narrow escape from Jamal Pasha's gallows, the Mandate High Commissioners were small fry. They were not important. They were easily, he was unintimidated by them. And he never gave up. And in fact, during the Mandate, they wrote several laws to deny him a place in the parliament, to fire him from his university job, to make it impossible that he practice law. These were laws that were written by the High Commissioner only for him. And so these days, I really I take this example, as inspiration and hope from that in dark times, and that we should flaunt the perils of authoritarianism. Thank you. Maybe